The day she saw what others didn't. Marble floors of the Westwood Tower gleamed under the mid-morning sun. Executives in pressed suits hurried past, coffee cups in hand, eyes glued to glowing screens. Nobody noticed her. They never did. Clara Johnson, the 52-year-old cleaning lady, moved silently with her mop, her warm brown eyes scanning the chaos. She had been here for 8 years, long enough to know every corner, every sound, every smell of this place. But today, something was different. Up on the 30th floor, she saw him, the man everyone whispered about. Alexander Kane, the youngest self-made billionaire in the city. Tall, sharply dressed, intimidating. The kind of man who could buy an entire company before breakfast. But today he didn't look like himself. Most people saw confidence in his stride. Clara saw something else. His steps were unsteady. His left hand twitched slightly as he signed a document, and when he reached for his coffee, his fingers missed the cup by inches before he grabbed it. No one reacted, not his assistant, not his bodyguards, not the executives around him. They were too busy talking about quarterly reports and market shares. But Clara's heart skipped a beat. Her own father had died 10 years ago after showing those same symptoms, mild, almost invisible signs of an impending stroke. She froze in the middle of the hallway, gripping her mop handle. She didn't have a medical degree. She wasn't even sure if she should say anything. What if she was wrong? What if he laughed in her face? Or worse, got her fired? Still, she couldn't just stand there. Her mind raced. She remembered her father's words: if you can help someone, do it. Don't wait for someone else. She watched Kane heading toward the elevator, already pulling out his phone to make a call. She knew if he walked out that door without help, it might be the last time anyone saw him alive. Clara dropped her mop, ignoring the startled look from a passing secretary. Her voice trembled but carried across the polished hallway. Sir, please stop. You need to sit down now. Every head turned. The billionaire froze, and that was the moment everything changed. The morning began like any other inside the towering glass headquarters of Whitmore Industries. Employees rushed in with coffee cups, high heels clicked against marble floors, and the scent of polished wood filled the air. But in the middle of all that luxury, tucked away in the quiet hallways, was Gloria Bennett, the black cleaning lady no one noticed. She wasn't bitter. She'd learned long ago that people rarely look twice at the person who empties their trash or scrubs their floors. But Gloria noticed everything. It was a skill she'd developed over decades, a quiet superpower hidden behind her warm smile. That morning, she stepped into the private office of Maxwell Whitmore, the CEO himself. The man was a legend, a billionaire whose handshake could change the fate of entire companies. Normally, Gloria found his office immaculate, but today, something felt off. His half-drunk glass of water sat untouched for hours. Papers were scattered on his desk, unusual for a man known for obsessive order. Then she noticed something else. When Maxwell walked in, he was slightly hunched, his hand subtly pressing against his chest. His normally booming voice seemed strained, his skin pale under the morning light. "Morning, Mr. Whitmore," Gloria greeted, pretending to dust his bookshelf. He nodded absent-mindedly, his gaze unfocused. To anyone else, it would have looked like simple fatigue. But to Gloria, whose brother had suffered a heart attack years earlier, the signs were screaming. And yet, nobody else in the office seemed to care. The assistants kept typing, the executives kept laughing in meetings, and Maxwell himself brushed it off with a wave. Gloria's instincts whispered something is very, very wrong. What she would do next would not only save Maxwell's life, it would change both of theirs forever. The next morning, the CEO arrived at his glass-walled office high above the city, carrying the weight of another sleepless night. The cleaning lady was already there, quietly wiping down his desk. He tried to hide the trembling in his hands, but she noticed her eyes followed him as he sank into his chair, pale and distracted. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked gently. "I'm fine," he replied, forcing a smile. But his voice cracked. Midway through his meeting with investors, the inevitable happened. He clutched his chest, his vision narrowing. Gasps filled the room. Someone shouted for an ambulance. The CEO collapsed to his knees, struggling for breath. His high-profile guests stood frozen, panic in their eyes, unsure what to do. But the cleaning lady didn't hesitate. She rushed in, dropping her cleaning supplies and kneeling beside him. Her voice was firm, commanding, "Call 911. Now she checked his pulse, her hands steady despite the chaos. She tilted his head back, making sure his airway was clear, and began chest compressions. The room went silent except for her voice, counting under her breath and the dull rhythm of her hands pressing life back into him. "Come on, breathe," she whispered urgently. The CEO gasped weakly, but his pulse was faint. She didn't stop. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she worked, refusing to let him slip away. By the time paramedics burst through the doors, she had kept him alive long enough for them to take over. One of them looked at her with respect and said, "If you hadn't acted, he wouldn't have made it." The powerful millionaire was lifted onto a stretcher, his life hanging by a thread, and the woman everyone ignored had just become his only hope. The conference room was silent except for the rustle of papers and the clicking of pens. The CEO, Richard Hale, stood at the head of the table, delivering a fiery presentation to a board of stone-faced investors. He was in his element, commanding, sharp, untouchable. But Maria's eyes never left him. She wasn't listening to the corporate jargon or the profit forecasts. She was watching him, the way his posture seemed tighter than usual, the slight tremor in his hands, and the sheen of sweat gathering at his temple despite the air-conditioned chill. Suddenly, mid-sentence, Richard's voice faltered. His hand went to his chest, his breath catching in shallow gasps. Paper slipped from his fingers. The room froze. Some gasped, others just stared, unsure what to do. Maria didn't hesitate. She dropped her cleaning cart and ran to him. "Call 911, she barked, her voice sharp enough to snap the entire boardroom into action. She supported him into a chair, keeping his head slightly elevated. "Stay with me, sir," she said firmly, her hand steady even as her heart pounded. She recognized the sign's shortness of breath, dizziness, and now his lips turning faintly blue. She'd seen this before. Years ago, when her father had collapsed at home, one of the executives reached for Richard's arm to help, but Maria stopped him. "Don't move him. He needs oxygen." Richard's eyes fluttered open for a moment, confusion and fear in them. He looked at Maria as if seeing her for the first time, not as a cleaner, but as the only person in the room who knew what to do. Sirens wailed in the distance. Maria kept talking to him, her voice calm but urgent. "You're not going anywhere today. Not on my watch." That was the moment everything changed. The gala was in full swing, laughter echoing, champagne glasses clinking, the orchestra swelling to its peak. But amid the glittering chaos, Lena's eyes stayed fixed on Jonathan. His face had paled. Beyond the glow of the chandeliers, and beads of sweat traced lines down his temple. She was clearing a table when it happened. Jonathan's hand shook violently, his champagne glass slipping and shattering against the marble floor. He tried to stand, but his knees buckled. Gasps erupted as the Millionaire CEO, the man who commanded boardrooms with an iron voice, now lay crumpled, clutching his chest. "Call an ambulance," someone screamed. Guests backed away in panic, forming a nervous circle around him. No one dared to act except Lena. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the shocked stares. "Jonathan, look at me," she barked, dropping to her knees beside him. Her voice, though trembling, carried a commanding force. She'd seen this before, too many times in her neighborhood, where ambulances arrived too late. She unbuttoned his collar, tilted his head slightly, and began checking his pulse. "Weak," she muttered. "He's losing time." Her years of looking after her grandmother had taught her the early signs. This wasn't a simple fainting spell. It was the real thing. "He's in cardiac distress." She yelled at the frozen crowd. "Move those tables now." But they still hesitated until her sharp glare cut through them like a knife. "Do you want him to die here in front of you?" That broke the spell. Chairs scraped, tables shifted, and space cleared. Lena rolled him gently to his side, her hand steady even as her heart pounded for the first time. Jonathan's fearful eyes locked on hers. And in that moment, he realized she might be the only person standing between him and death. For a moment, the hospital room was silent, except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Richard Sterling, the once insatiable CEO, lay there staring at the ceiling. The events of the past 24 hours played in his mind like a storm. His sudden collapse, the chaos in the office, and then her face. Evelyn, the cleaning lady who had saved him. It was almost absurd to think about. In all his years of business, Richard had been surrounded by doctors, assistants, and consultants, charging thousands per hour. Yet the person who noticed what no one else did, earned minimum wage and wore a name tag. When Evelyn entered quietly to check on him, Richard couldn't stop looking at her, not with pity, but with a new kind of respect. You saved my life," he said slowly, his voice rough but sincere. "How did you even know something was wrong?" Evelyn hesitated, then told him about her husband, how she'd lost him years ago because no one spotted the early signs of a stroke. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She had learned to carry pain like a hidden weight. "I promised myself," she whispered, "that if I ever saw it again, I'd speak up, no matter who it was." Richard swallowed hard. For a man who prided himself on control, he felt strangely humbled. This woman had no stake in his company, no reason to protect him, but she did anyway. Not for money, not for recognition, but because it was right in that instant. Richard knew his life wasn't just spared, it was changed, and he was going to make sure Evelyn's life would never be the same again, in the best way possible. The next morning, the headquarters of Sterling Industries was buzzing like a beehive. Employees whispered in corridors, scrolling through their phones in disbelief. The news had broken. CEO rushed to hospital, saved by staff members' quick thinking. By noon, the conference hall was packed. Cameras lined the back, journalists leaning forward with notepads ready. At the podium, Daniel Sterling, still pale but standing tall, adjusted the microphone. His voice, though steady, carried a rare tremor of emotion. "Yesterday," he began, "I came closer to death than I ever imagined, and I am alive today, because of one woman who noticed what no one else did." He turned, extending a hand toward the side stage. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Rosa stepped forward, her cleaning uniform pressed, hands trembling slightly. She'd never stood in front of so many people in her life. Daniel continued. While everyone else overlooked my symptoms, Rosa stopped. She spoke up, and she refused to let me ignore them. That courage saved my life. The room erupted in applause, cameras flashing as Rosa blinked back tears. But Daniel wasn't done. From this day on, he said firmly, Rosa will no longer clean floors for Sterling Industries. She will serve as my personal health and safety advisor with a salary that reflects the value of a life saved. More gasps. Rosa covered her mouth, unable to speak. Daniel smiled softly. Titles and suits mean nothing when it comes to humanity. Yesterday proved that. So let this be a reminder to all: look closer, listen harder, and never ignore the quiet voices. The applause grew, deafening, but Rosa's heart was louder. In that moment, she wasn't just the woman who saved a CEO's life. She was the woman who made the world see her worth. The next morning, the story was everywhere. News outlets picked it up after an employee leaked a short clip from the office. Security camera showing Linda gently supporting the CEO as he nearly collapsed. The headline read, "Cleaning lady saves billionaire's life." When Marcus arrived at the office, he wasn't in his usual sharp suit. Instead, he wore a casual shirt and looked visibly emotional. He called the entire company to gather in the main hall. Linda, still in her cleaning uniform, tried to stay in the back, but Marcus spotted her instantly and waved her forward. "This woman," he began, his voice carrying a rare vulnerability, "is the reason I'm standing here today. Yesterday I could have been in an ambulance, or worse, but Linda noticed something every doctor, every friend, every person around me had missed. She saved me." The crowd erupted in applause, some even standing on chairs to see her. Linda's cheeks flushed, and she tried to shake her head. But Marcus wasn't done. "From this day forward, she will never again be called the cleaning lady in this building. She is now our wellness consultant, and yes, with an executive salary." Linda's jaw dropped. The applause became deafening. Reporters swarmed outside, eager to get a statement. One journalist asked, "Linda, how did you know what to do?" She smiled softly. "When you spend your life cleaning, you notice the small things, and sometimes those small things save lives." Her words hit the headlines harder than any corporate announcement. By evening, she wasn't just a hero in her office, she was trending worldwide. And for Marcus, she wasn't just his employee anymore, she was his guardian angel. The private hospital room was quiet, save for the faint beeping of the heart monitor. The air carried that peculiar mix of sterilized safety and lingering fear. Mr. Kingsley, now sitting upright in bed, looked far less like the untouchable titan of industry the world knew and far more like a man who had come face to face with his own mortality. Clara stood by the window, unsure if she should stay or leave. The event of the past few hours still felt unreal. The doctor's words, "If she hadn't acted when she did, you wouldn't be here," kept echoing in both of their minds. "Clara," he said softly, breaking the silence. His voice wasn't the booming, confident tone she'd always heard, barking orders across the office. It was quieter, almost hesitant. "How did you know?" She turned, eyes shimmering. "My father died from the same thing. I recognized the signs instantly. I wasn't about to let it happen again. Not if I could help it." For a long moment, he just stared at her, as if searching for something in her face. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You saved my life. And I don't mean that lightly. I owe you more than I can ever repay." Clara shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, sir. Just take care of yourself. That's all I want." But he leaned forward, his tone firm now. "No, Clara. You've been invisible in my world for far too long. That ends today. From this moment on, you'll never be overlooked again. Not by me, and not by anyone." And in that quiet hospital room, the millionaire made a promise that would change Clara's life forever. The following month, the CEO's company held a lavish charity gala. The chandeliers dripped with crystal light, and the air buzzed with the hum of the city's most powerful. When the host stepped up to the microphone, everyone expected the usual speech about market growth, quarterly wins, or some polished corporate message. Instead, he said, "Before we begin, I want to tell you a story. It's about a woman who saved my life when I didn't even know I was in danger." He turned toward the crowd, his hand lifting toward the back of the room. There, dressed in an elegant navy gown that shimmered like midnight, stood Maria, no longer in her cleaning uniform, but radiant, poised, and a little shy under the spotlight. The guests murmured. Cameras turned. She noticed symptoms. The CEO continued, his voice tightening with emotion, that everyone, including me, ignored. "She acted when no one else did. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't be here tonight. She's not just an employee. She's my friend, my hero." The room erupted into applause. Some stood, others wiped their eyes. Maria's own hands trembled as she walked toward the stage, the CEO meeting her halfway. When he hugged her, the moment froze in time, the powerful embracing the humble, gratitude silencing the noise of wealth and status. And in that silence, Maria realized something. This wasn't about being thanked in front of strangers. It was about knowing she had done the right thing when it mattered most, and that it had changed everything that night. Maria didn't just save a life. She changed a heart, and in the world of power and money, that might be the rarest miracle of all.